Well, hello everybody. I'm glad that we're all together to celebrate the Gemini full moon festival. Actually, some of you have read the labors of Hercules, and you know that the Gemini labor is rather complex. It has 5 parts. I think Hercules fails to recognize the Nereus as the intuition. Then he sort of defeats a form of glamour in the form of Antaeus. That's the second part. In the third part, he encounters Bucyrus, who keeps him in delusion for quite a long time. There's a fourth part where he rescues Prometheus, and a fifth part where he helps Atlas bear the burden of the world. So actually 5 parts to that labor. And then, of course, the golden apples of the Hesperides roll into his hands when he delays his rapid forward progress, apparently forward progress to help uphold the burden of the world. Well, we also have, as we are preparing for our Gemini work, we're going to have 3 pre-days. This is the first one, where the Christ works with the hierarchy, we are told, and emphasizes a certain keynote, which is related to the Gemini work. The first keynote sounded today will be the keynote of love, and we'll get to that as we go along through the meditation. And tomorrow's keynote, if you're able to join us, will be that of resurrection, and then the keynote of contact. And they will all be at this same time, which is 7 o'clock GMT. And then the next morning, at least it'll be morning for me, and I'm not exactly sure what time, but I'll tell you, within the next couple of days, we will have a pre-full moon Gemini webinar emphasizing the astrological factors. When it comes to the actual moment of the full moon, which I understand is about 4:19, I'm not sure how many seconds, 4:19 p.m., on June the 2nd, GMT, it will be either a webinar or a broadcast. If my wife Tuya goes to London for the Arcane School Conference, it will be a webinar. I will offer it. And if she is here, it will be a broadcast with music and imagery and so forth, and we will send you the link on that. So we have a quite a multiple process going on, actually 5 different events, 5 different webinars and or broadcasts, just as the Labors of Hercules has 5 different parts connected with Gemini. So we are now entering this period of 3 days before the actual full moon, a little more than 3 days, and it's really such a high point if you think of it. The Christ, I believe, in 1943, from what the Tibetan writes, he achieved a high point of loving realization, I believe, as an aspect of the 7th initiation, which over a process of some 2,000 or more years, maybe more, maybe even 3,000 or 4,000 years, he seems to be undergoing. But it's a high point of loving realization found in Gemini. Gemini is said to be, interestingly, as a constellation, the head of the cosmic Christ. So we certainly have a blending of head and heart. We have a blending of soul and personality under the influence of Gemini. We also have a blending of spirit with the soul-infused personality. the soul and the personality are blended under the influence of Mercury in relation to Gemini, and the spirit is blended with the soul-infused personality under the influence of Jupiter. Jupiter, usually a planet that is considered weakened in this sign, but not from the really deeply esoteric point of view. It's a huge second ray type of emphasis. So I think we have to understand this is called the Christ Festival, also the Festival of Humanity, but how important this Gemini full moon is to the great Lord, the Christ, the head of the hierarchy, and how the Buddha still, after his own festival, the festival of Wesak, is cooperating with the Christ, just as the Christ was cooperating at Wesak with the Buddha. So these great lords are so prominent in our work at this time, and we will get into that. So if there is the possibility in us to really understand what this higher form of love is, and to tune in any way, if we can, with the kind of energy that is coming forth from the Christ, a great being who is in process of taking the seventh initiation, which is related to the logoic plane, to the sea of fire, to the highest plane of Shambhala on the cosmic physical plane. If we can in any way attune with those energies, this is the time for us to begin doing it. So it's a very special time, and all of this leading up to World Invocation Day. I haven't checked whether it's exactly on the day of the full moon, but it certainly could be, and we'll try to check on that. I'll ask my colleagues to check on World Invocation Day, whether it's the day before it's actually the day of the full moon. And it's the time when all of us who are using the great invocation as an instrument to bring about the reappearance of the Christ, it's a time when we can sound it forth constantly, every hour, every half hour, however often we decide to do it, sound it out loud and just fill the ethers with that great mantram of power and light. We do know that when the Christ made his decision after a 9-year period from 1936 to 1945, and said, yes, I will be returning in physical, tangible form, that the Lord of the world, Sanat Kumara, gave that invocation out of Shambhala to the Christ to be used by humanity. So it was such a momentous decision on the part of the Christ, again part of his seventh initiation, I do believe, and it set the possibility for humanity to receive such an amazing word of power. It's the Christ's sacrifice to return in that tangible physical form, although it would be a Maya Virupa, not a body born in the normal human way, but a Maya Virupa, but still a physical form. And that act of sacrifice released the great invocation for all of us to use. Well, rather than get into a lot of astrological things now, I'll save that for the pre-full moon. We will just begin. This meditation has several parts. The alignment part, of course, is very important, and hopefully it will take us into the presence of certain energies which we do not ordinarily contact, and then we'll get on with the theme of love as it is expressed by the Christ and his hierarchy on this day, 3 days before the full moon. Okay, friends, so we will enter into meditation together at this time, and we'll do our best to get this to you as rapidly as possible, and any changes regarding webinar or broadcast, we will get to you by email as soon as we are certain of the way we will handle this. All right, so we begin with our spiritual approach and with an engagement with the available energies. So we calm all of the vehicles and yet keep them in a state of alertness. And we withdraw our consciousness from the outer sensory physical form. And from our sentient states within the astral body, and from the many thoughts that may be within our concrete mind, we realize that we are the soul, the consciousness, the unit of consciousness being. And we are not those various vehicles, at least at this point. We are not those vehicles. We have them, we are not them. We are the unit of consciousness, and within that sense of being the soul in incarnation, we enter deeply into the presence of the soul on its own plane, at least imaginatively so. We imagine that we are sort of fading away from the usual personality, perceptions, and entering into a field of light, of spiritual love, and of spiritual sacrificial will, spiritual power. As we find ourselves identified as this type of consciousness on its own plane, the higher mental plane, we are merging deeply into the sense of a group soul. We are not alone as a soul, there is but one soul. And all of us in the group and the wider groups are aspects of this one consciousness. So we are merging into the sense of the group's soul. Those who are here meditating and those who may be meditating elsewhere to participate meditatively in the work of the Christ and his hierarchy. So as we begin to get that sense of the group's soul on the higher mental plane, we are merging in soul with all the spiritually minded people of the world, with the members of the new group of world servers, wherever they may be found. We are merging in soul with them. feel this great will to good which animates this group. And merging in soul with all the men and women of goodwill, in all the different countries, wherever they may be found. And finally, really, with all human beings, whether in the body or out of the body, all one soul, the one soul of humanity, we see if we can fuse our consciousness into that one soul. It's one being, really. Ultimately, there is no my soul and thy soul. There's one consciousness here, pervading all the fourth kingdom of nature, the human kingdom, and really pervading all the kingdoms of nature. And finally, we come to realize this very deep statement, part of a second ray mantra: naught is but me. Not the little me, but this great identity that we all are. Every day it could be pondered, because one can go ever deeper in the realization of it. Naught is but me. And this is realized in the heart, and in the heart in the head, and in the soul, and really, finally, in the spirit itself. A great mantra of Gemini: I serve the One. Even though it's the sign of duality, still there is the realization of the One. So we are focusing in the mind at a point of tension. We call the group mental unit, and we're preparing to reaffirm that bridge which leads into the higher worlds. We have various aspects of the group soul blending with the mind. Different aspects of the will blending with our point of projection that we call the mental unit, or that point of tension on the fourth level of the mental plane. We strengthen that with the will to initiate, with the will to unify, with the will to evolve, with the will to harmonize, with the will to act, with the will to cause, with the will to express. This point of tension from which we will project towards the spirit itself is of great importance. And we imagine our own dual-colored rainbow bridge with the colors of our soul and personality ray, or use indigo if you're not sure, but as we know, one way of looking at these colors: red for the first ray, indigo for the second, green for the third, yellow for the fourth, orange for the fifth, rose color for the sixth, and violet for the seventh. So your dual-colored strand of colored light, feel it as it extends upward through the impersonal spheres, the triadal spheres, toward that great center of oneness, the spirit itself. And all of our antikaranas, bridges of light, blend and merge with the group antikarana we can visualize it a kind of a cone-like ascent through the abstract mind, through the transcendental or intuitive mind, through the spiritual will, and finally touching that great center of being, the monad. We want to be illumined here by that monadic light, which is ultimately shambhalic light. And we will use the word of power. I see the greatest light. It's a second ray word of power, and we will imagine the beam of radiant white light projecting along the colored bridge and anchoring finally in the monad, in the sense of being, identity, oneness. So we'll sound the Om while in our minds we say, I see the greatest light. We'll do that 3 times on a second ray note, the G. I see the greatest light, and may it descend into our thoughts, our deliberations together as we ponder the first keynote for this day. And so we are, at least imaginatively, in the realm where the Master's consciousness is focused all the time, and that is the spiritual triad and subject to the monad. I take a moment to really appreciate that possibility. And may our consciousness over these days actually be altered, be elevated, so that we can live more in that world. Those worlds which are in the true ego, the true soul, which actually is our spiritual triad that we can contact via this antikarana which we are building individually and building as a group. And as long as we are at least imaginatively penetrating into the realm where walk the Masters, we will offer them our heartfelt gratitude, our salutations. And we will stand with them in their service, according to the kind of service that we can offer individually and in our groups. And this will include the Buddha, who during these two festivals is active, although his true residence is in Shambhala at this time, we are told. So we will begin sounding the Om and offering our salutations together. You can sound this aloud in your home with me. You can see the words. Salutations to the Buddha, the Lord of Light and Wisdom. Salutations to the Christ, the Master of all Masters. Salutations to the triangle of Masters with whom we most closely work. Masters M, KH, and DK. Salutations to the Master Morya. Salutations to the Master Kutume. Salutations to the Master Jwal Ku. Salutations to the entire spiritual hierarchy of our planet, including the Master with whom you feel most affiliated. And we imaginatively raise our thought to Shambhala, the center where the will of God is known, and with deepest reverence and in all humility attempt, identified as the group soul together, to attune with the presence of Sanat Kumara standing at the center of Shambhala, and as we sound the long interior silent Om, we imagine the entire group, our group here, and the groups with whom we work, and the new group of world servers, and all the men and women of goodwill, imbued as much as possible with the sense of divine will and purpose. So, this long, silent, interior Om. This is the purpose to which we must adhere to the degree possible. And it comes to the earth via Mercury, via Venus, of course via Gemini itself, all this coming to the Earth, which is one of the rulers of the sign Gemini. A very important triangle, which is Gemini itself with Mercury and Venus, and then Mercury, Venus, Earth. And we reach out toward the great God of love, the blue logos, our solar logos, so closely related to Gemini in very profound ways. That great second ray of love wisdom, pervading our solar system, pervading every unit of life within our solar system. The great love in which we live and move and have our being, and that love which is the keynote of our work tonight. And it is the second ray particularly which is coming through Gemini, and this is the keynote on which we work. The resolution of all dualities into unity. It's a very high time of love now, of a very high nature. We want to be part of that sharing of this great and beautiful love, which the Christ represents for us, but which has much higher sources. Originating for us in the head of the cosmic Christ. And it's now that the forces of reconstruction can be released. The forces of restoration and of enlightenment have been released at the previous two festivals of the higher interlude, and now the forces of reconstruction, the rebuilding of human civilization and our planet, according to the plan, which the forces of restoration revealed, and all of this pursued in an illumined manner as the forces of enlightenment reveal. These are great entities, actually, these forces. And so indeed we are attuning with them. We always understand that the lesser selves, the personality nature, will be absorbed into the higher nature, and that we are that higher nature, and we do recognize my other self. And in the waning of that self, I grow and glow. We can say this of the group soul too. We recognize our other self, and in the waning of that self, we grow and glow. We will develop these themes over the next days, but we are not caught in the lower nature. we draw it into that which we really are. That growing and glowing spirit soul self on the higher planes. And now we are ready to consider the Christ and the Buddha, realizing their brotherhood as they represent the West and the East, respectively, and the spiritual union of these two hemispheres. They stand for us, for the constellation Gemini. They are the brothers in the light. We pause to realize this. And how much their partnership has done and continues to do almost all the way through the Aquarian Age for humanity. We will all be quite different at the latter part of the Aquarian Age because of what they do together on our behalf. We are, with hierarchy, preparing for the day of the full moon itself, when it is said that the Christ preaches the last sermon of the Buddha before the assembled hierarchy, and in that sense before the hearts and minds of all human beings. So we're going to enter into a portion of that sermon with these words. And this is the Buddha's advice. He was always extremely practical. Herein, O Ananda, let a brother, as he dwells in the body, that's all of us, of course, so regard the body that he, being strenuous, thoughtful, and mindful, may, whilst in the world, overcome the grief which arises from the body's cravings. This is advice for us, what we must do. And so together we affirm in ourselves, each one of us, the fact that we can be strenuous, thoughtful, and mindful in the process of overcoming the grief which arises from the body's cravings, and we resolve, each one of us, to be so. The Buddha was a tremendous disciplinarian with his first ray personality, we are told, and the first sub-ray, the shambolic sub-ray of his soul, his second ray soul. And he knew the way that we must follow if we would succeed. So we seek to overcome the body's cravings through an attitude which is strenuous, thoughtful, and mindful. And we have the power of the Buddha behind us to do this, and we all must do this. We all must do this. Then we have a profound gratitude for the Lord Buddha, the Lord of Light and Wisdom, for all he has done to illumine humanity. And with that gratitude we turn and refocus our attention upon the Christ. And now we listen inwardly with the utmost heartful attentiveness of which we are capable. We imagine that we hear the Christ sounding the great invocation, and we will allow a period for the silent absorption of his, for us at least, imagined sounding. So on each of the 3 days of preparation, the Christ is said to speak the great invocation alone. So we pause in our inner heart, our inner ear, and we imagine him sounding the great invocation. Of course, it would not be in the language we know. Perhaps the Pali script is used, perhaps, or the censor, but something that conveys the original of this great invocation. And now, with very focused attention, listening inwardly with great care, we imagine that the Christ and the entire hierarchy is intoning the first stanza of the great invocation. I know you know it by heart, but there it is on your screen if you need it. The Christ and the entire hierarchy chanting these 3 lines, the first stanza. This they do, we are told, and what a power it must be. These significant words, chanted by that august body of world servers. And whenever it may occur, our attempt to listen inwardly will attune us with their invocative efforts directed towards Shambhala. We imagine the illumination of humanity in the planet. We see a more enlightened human race, and our planet as a great station of light. This is coming. It will take some time, but we are part of this process. The illumination of humanity under the hierarchy, under Shambhala, according to the first stanza of this great word of power, this mantra of power and light. But now the keynote for today is love. And I'll read what the Tibetan has said here. The keynote of love. In its hierarchical sense, free from sentiment, emotion, and personal emphasis. A love that sacrifices and understands, that acts with strength and decision, and that works on behalf of the whole, and not in the interests of any group or individual. Look at those words. because we are as if contemplating with the Christ and the spiritual hierarchy this first keynote of love in its hierarchical sense, free from sentiment, emotion, and personal emphasis, a love that sacrifices and understands, that acts with strength and decision, and that works on behalf of the whole and not in the interests of any group or individual. And so we envision this type of love growing in ourselves and in all human beings. And we imagine how we may apply this type of hierarchical love for the benefit of all. We'll enter meditation to do this, envisioning this type of love growing in ourselves and in all, and being expressed. And over this coming day, let us invoke this type of love as DK describes it, free from sentiment, emotion, personality, sacrificing, understanding, acting with strength and decision, and as individuals, as groups, and as all humanity, let us work on behalf of the whole as we can conceive it. on behalf of the whole. It is said of Gemini, I serve the whole. Or I serve the one, rather. That's how disciples and initiates conceive it. I serve the one. Not just my brother, which is important, but the one itself. So let's take these keynotes really seriously and work accordingly, sustaining them through this important period leading up to the actual full moon. And so, friends, we affirm in soul our solidarity with the Buddha, with Christ, and the assembled hierarchy, however you do it, but we affirm our solidarity with them. And we imaginatively merging with them, with these great ones, with their purpose, and in our own way, we bless the world in silence. We go on these days blessing the world. It's very important to bless, to call for all that the soul can deliver, regardless of how the personality seems to be manifesting. To send the best, to call for the best in all situations. We pause then for a moment of appreciation of the illumined, loving energies of the constellation Gemini. A real Lord of the constellation Gemini exists, a great being. One of 12 petals in the head center. In that heart in the head center of the great being we call the one about whom naught may be said, a kind of super constellational logos. And we feel ourselves these days imbued with these energies which are growing in strength as the full moon approaches. as if in union with the Christ, the Buddha, the hierarchy, and all disciples in the world. We sound aloud now, at home, wherever we are listening, the first stanza of the great invocation, sensing the redemptive union of light and love. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. Thank you, friends, for being here, whatever time it is for you. Tomorrow at the same time we continue. It's day 2, and our keynote is that amazing quality, state, related to the 7th initiation, which Gemini represents, and that is the keynote of resurrection. I hope that the time that these things begin is clear to all of us. 7 o'clock p.m. Universal Time, Greenwich Mean Time. It's not daylight time. It's always the same. So try to calculate to GMT from where you are and hold this keynote of love in your minds during this day, during this 24 hours. And tomorrow we work with resurrection, and before long we'll let you know whether our exact full moon presentation will be a webinar or broadcast. We'll be letting you know as soon as we know ourselves. So thank you for being here with us. Appreciate your presence so much, and we will get this out to you, the link, as soon as we prepare it, convert it, get it ready. So if you wish to use it, you can. Thank you, and good night, good day, good evening, good morning, whatever it is. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.